Hi, everyone. We're going to get started in just a second. Thanks.
Hello. Testing. 1, 2, 3.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Maddie Burris, one of Castora's marketing managers, and I'm very excited to be here today with Jordan Elkind, who is Castora's head of product management. Thanks so much for joining the webinar today about reducing promotions. These webinars are part of our efforts to bring together a community of e-commerce marketers, and we try to make them as much as possible about you guys. We'd love to hear from you during the session as always, so please feel free to ask any questions you may have simply by chatting them into the GoToWebinar window. We'll have some time for Q&A at the end of the presentation, and if we're not able to get to your question, then we'll follow up via email afterwards. So Jordan's going to present for around 40 minutes, and then we'll leave about 15 for Q&A. After the webinar, we'll definitely email you the deck, the recording, and if you have any questions, just feel free to reach out. We'll also send a brief survey, and we appreciate if you give us feedback. It really helps us improve. So again, really happy to have everyone on today. Chat any questions you have, and with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jordan. Jordan, I'm just going to make you the presenter.
Great. Thank you so much. Howdy, everyone. And thanks so much for taking the time to meet with us today to talk about a topic that is near and dear to our heart, which is weaning off the habit of promotionality. This is a topic that we spend a lot of time thinking about and talking to retail leaders about. As many of you might know, Castora is the leading predictive analytics platform in the retail space. We have the great pleasure and privilege of working with 7 of the top 20 US retailers, including global brands that are renowned for their focus on customer centricity and growing in the right way. And this is a topic that has come up in probably just about every customer implementation that we've run over the last few years. And so I'm excited to be with you here today to distill some of the best practices and wisdom that we've accumulated from working with some of the brightest minds in retail. Okay, so we're going to actually start with a little poll here. I'm just going to get it going. In 2016, what percentage of orders were sold on promotion? Great, seeing the responses flow in here. Let's take just one more moment to wrap up with some final thoughts. Excellent. Okay, fantastic. So I'm actually going ahead and sharing the results with you now. Hopefully you're able to see those. And interestingly, the correct answer here is 44%. A staggering 44% of orders were sold on promotion. It's interesting that was actually not the most commonly chosen answer. It seems like folks were hovering in the right neighborhood. 37% got a lot of love. I'm interested to talk more to the group of bright-eyed optimists who thought that we might be only at 13%. But ultimately, when we look at research from the industry, we do see that somewhere approaching 50% of retail orders are actually sold on promotion. I think that helps to contextualize just why this is such a mission critical question for retailers today, struggling to eke out growth and hit their comps year after year in the retail space. So let's start with a quick state of the world. As we just talked about, a good chunk of orders are sold on promotion. When we factor in markdowns as well, so excess of inventory leading to price reductions, the number actually climbs to a staggering 67%. All of this by way of saying that the reliance on discounts and promotionality is real and rampant. And we're glad to be able to have a platform to talk about this with some folks who are probably looking at their numbers and wondering just how they can stem the tide of rising promotionality. So why does this matter? We spend a lot of time wringing our hands about just how much we're promoting, how it's getting harder and harder year after year to drive results from the same promos. The reality is that this has a tangible impact on the bottom line. In fact, as of 2016, and no doubt these numbers show an even steeper cut when we look at last year, we see nearly a quarter reduction in margin for North American retailers. But basically, while discounting and price promotion are becoming ever more rampant, they're taking a bigger toll than ever on the bottom line of the retail world. As we spoke about on our last promotion, we sometimes hear about the retail apocalypse, of the gloom and doom landscape that we see when we look at traditional retailers and see closing doors and bankruptcies. The precipitous drop in margin is certainly one contributing factor, as we see in cash flow and operating margins growing ever thinner. How exactly does this relationship work between pricing power and operating profits? Well, holding all else steady, a reduction in just 1% in average prices, whether that's through markdowns or a targeted price promotion, actually brings operating profits down by 8%. So you can imagine the toll that this will take as pricing power continues to erode. It's just a real factor eating into the bottom line of many of the retailers that we work with. Another fun way of thinking about this, right, is just reflect on your own behavior around promotion seeking and discounting. What we've pulled here is a quick little snapshot of search traffic volume. Looking at just one particular search term, this is the volume in discount code searches over time. And you'll probably see a couple of things when you look at this. Perhaps not surprisingly for those in the retail space, there is a tremendous amount of cyclicality. So we see these huge peaks around holiday time, which is prime time for discounting and price promotions. But if you squint and look at the long-term trajectory, the perhaps more alarming trend that we're seeing here is like an order of magnitude increase in the overall volume of interest and attention being dedicated to seeking out discount codes. The long and short of it is retailers have fallen into the habit, for a variety of reasons that we'll talk about in just a second, of discounting more and more aggressively. And as a result, consumers have come to expect that this is just a standard way of doing business, at least in the retail space. So without belaboring the point, and certainly hoping not to be pedantic here, since we all know the dangers of discounting, which is why we're on the call, but we want to point to a couple of ranging from short-term to long-term effects that we see when we look out at the retail landscape. As we just talked about, there is an immediate and tangible impact on margin, specifically any loss of pricing power, the use of promotions and discounts eats directly into margins, which impacts the bottom line, obviously. Beyond that, thinking a little bit beyond the initial impact when we put a promotion out in market, there's kind of a customer habituation or training dynamic that we see when we talk to retailers. And this explains part of the the negative cycle of having to continually discount deeper and run more promotions year after year in order to get the same lift, which is that customers have actually come to expect a discount, and it's harder and harder to get them to take action or make a purchase without that promotion in place. And then really thinking about the long term, we hear a lot of brands, especially on the premium end of the scale, but really a vast and diverse swath of retailers expressing concern about brand devaluation, loss of brand identity. That as we expect, or as we train our customers to expect discounts, we're basically telegraphing to them that there's nothing unique and differentiated enough about our value proposition, that our products are not worth full price. And that leads to some major concerns around brand equity and the ability to sustain a high performing brand over the long run. We actually found this incredibly perfect graphic from some of our friends in vendor land. This is from Smile. And it's a really nice dramatization of the death spiral that we tend to see when we work with retailers, especially retailers who perhaps are new e-commerce startups, are just exploring a change in strategy as they expand across more channels, and really thinking about the impact, short and long term, of discounting for the first time. Imagine a retailer who has only commanded full price on all products to date. A retailer that is maintains a strong discipline around not discounting, not using promotion codes. Well, it can certainly be very tempting to run a promotion, even if it's just a limited time type of discount, because it undoubtedly leads to a short-term sales increase. That's, after all, why we all run promotions. But as we just talked about, this notion of habituating customers to expect more promotions over time, as customers get used to seeing discounts come their way, they build a reliance on them. And so in the absence of discounting, we actually see a net drop in sales. Perhaps we even dip down to further than we were before we started discounting in the first place. The net impact of that from the retail side, of course, since we are in a business where we need to anniversary last year's performance and achieve some level of growth, is frequent, bigger sales. Our friends and family sale goes from 3 days to a week to 2 weeks. We go from 15% off to 20% off to 40% off. We go from tiered offers to no strings attached offers. And ultimately, what we see happening as those sales begin rolling in, taking a bigger toll on the bottom line margins, that actually contributes to long-term loss of revenue, as less margin and less cash flow means less ability to invest in the good brand building activities that help a brand drive demand over a sustained period of time. Things like investing in your marketing channels, investing in new product development, investing in customer insights. All of those suffer as a result. Now, I hate the fact that I just referred to this as the death spiral of discounting. I like the downward spiral more. It has less of a final apocalyptic edge than death spiral. What we're going to talk about over the course of the session today is how we get over this. But first, I just want to pause for 1 second on the elusive allure of discounting. And this is an argument that we sometimes hear even from highly analytically sophisticated teams. It goes something like this, and we've tried to show a quick graphical representation here. You know, when we get a customer to go from making 1 purchase to 2 purchases, that actually builds brand loyalty. More engagement with the brand, more touch points means more of a chance for us to tell our brand story. And so even if we have to buy or subsidize that second order through discounting, you can see through data that looks just like this, and I'll say we see this with 99.9% of Castora's retail customers as well, that more purchases means more of a propensity to make follow-on purchases. Now, if you follow this thread of thought, it might almost seem like a no-brainer to discount, especially things like a retailer's customer's first purchase or a customer's second purchase, because after all, the game is to lock them in, to give them enough exposure to your brand that they love you and they're ready to come back and make lots of repeat purchases. Here's the problem. It never actually works that way in practice. We have spent a lot of time working with really, really smart retail teams, and what they tend to point out when they see data like this is, sure, this is true. A customer who makes two purchases is more likely to make a third purchase, but that's just a matter of self-selection. The customers who love you and care about your brand are the ones who are coming back to make that second purchase. And those customers are disproportionately likely to go on to make a third purchase. And similarly, just the act of making a third purchase is making a third purchase tells you something about the relationship that a customer has with your brand, that they love you, and therefore they're more likely to go on to make a fourth purchase. This notion of customer alchemy, taking a customer who's otherwise indifferent to your brand and incentivizing them to make a second purchase because it will boost the repeat likelihood of their third purchase. All of the brands that we've talked to, nobody has actually seen a discount strategy work like that in practice. What tends to happen disproportionately, 99% of the time, is that we strongly incentivize a customer to make a second purchase, and then we never hear from them again because really we were just buying their loyalty for the short term. And so just a word of caution to those analytically oriented folks on the phone as you're looking at your own customer engagement data and thinking, hey, what if we could get customers over that magic hump, get them to two purchases or three purchases? It's never a winning strategy in our experience to do that through discounting. We'll talk about some ways to do that a little bit later, but discounting, in addition to all of the corrosive effects that we've talked about, reducing margins, habituating customers, doesn't actually lead to that elusive long-term customer loyalty. So as we sat down to think about how can we help the retail community get our arms around this pervasive problem, what are the best practices that we see from retailers that are really owning their promotion strategy and have great discount discipline, we started by asking ourselves a series of 5 whys. Like, why is it that retailers actually promote? And for folks on the phone, some of these may seem more self-evident than others, but it actually surprised us the range of reasons that we hear articulated from retailers. And as we think about crafting a playbook and solutions to address each of these, it's really helpful to know what's the root cause behind all of them. So the first one, and we hear this articulated from retailers across the spectrum, is really the markdown rationale. We need to, our sell-through isn't keeping pace with where we thought it would be. We're holding on to a bunch of inventory. We're seeing carrying costs, and we need to clear out some of the excess inventory in order to make way for new buys. That's a big source of promotional activity. Competitive pressures. Often when we talk to retailers, especially when they turn their eye to holiday time, their whole holiday planning session is essentially a competitive landscape postmortem from last year. What did retailer A do? What promotions was retailer B running? This we would characterize as the share of wallet argument, right? We might not want to promote in an ideal world, but if all of our peer retailers, our competitive set, are running a 40% off and we're only running 30% off, we're gonna really be strapped to capture that share of wallet that we need, especially during critical times. And then lastly, perhaps the most basic, but also the most profound because it's so darn difficult to address, is retailers promote to hit comps, so meet their revenue goals and actually increase the revenue and reach that they're seeing year over year. So if I had to characterize these in a nutshell, it's like inventory mismatch, share of wallet / competitive, and growth pressures. We're going to walk through for each of these how we see leading retailers fixing these problems, addressing them in the short term and in the long term. Before we get started with some case studies and best practices, I just want to recap a fundamental pillar of Castora's methodology. Those who have been on webinars with us before are familiar with our thinking about this. We have an expression around Castora: don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And that encapsulates our thinking around these thorny, complex issues like promotions. Of course, we all want the best long-term solution, the thing that's going to help us get out of the discounting spiral and grow our brand equity in the long run. Those are complex strategies that require effort and organizational alignment and take time. And you'll see that when we provide some inspiration about companies that have actually gotten to that long-term equilibrium. In the meantime, We espouse very much a crawl, walk, run approach. Focus on the small number of simpler things that can drive benefit for your organization immediately. The quick wins, the low-hanging fruit. You probably have your own organizational jargon for these things, but things that can help you make a dent on the problem in a meaningful way in the short term while we're building towards that long-term solution. And so it's in that spirit that we're going to walk through each of these buckets of kind of drivers of promotionality, provide the short-term quick wins playbook, and then paint a picture of what it could look like in the long term. Solutions, short and long term. Let's go. Okay, so pushing inventory. Again, the problem statement here is I've overbought in category X or category Y. It's cluttering up my shelves. I need to make way for additional inventory. This is more often than not the driver for markdown promotions. The story that I want to share here is from a vertically integrated specialty retailer that we work with, an omni-channel retailer who for quite a long time, by their accounting, has been struggling with how to keep up with trends without buying too much into particular product categories. And the situation that they found themselves in when we started working with them was every month they would have some overrun on categories that they needed to move in order to make way for kind of the new season's arrivals, items that they expected to move a little bit quicker. What they were doing when we started working with them was essentially a spray and pray markdown strategy. They would send markdown emails to everybody in the customer base. They would advertise those markdowns loudly on their website. As you're thinking about this from the perspective of habituating customers or training your customers to expect price reductions, it was a really problematic strategy. And to their credit, they recognized that right away. And they wanted to take ownership over how do we do this in a more targeted way. Yes, we still need to liquidate inventory. We are in the business of retail after all, and we're never going to be able to buy with perfect accuracy. But we want to do it in a way that doesn't downsell the rest of our customer base or train our customers to expect these reductions. What they were able to do was, in pretty quick order, go from a place where they were massively promoting these discounted or promoted categories to every customer to a much, much more surgical approach using individual user level product affinities. Now, this is partially a plug for Castora, but I'd also like to highlight that this is well within the capabilities of every retailer, including those who don't work with a vendor like Castora, to understand what are the products and the items that individual customers are most likely to gravitate towards. In our case, we worked with them to do some lookalike modeling within their customer base. So perhaps an individual customer hadn't yet bought fancy tank tops, but they resembled other customers who had bought those items on markdown previously. Other retailers that we work with use simple historical data. So which customers in the past have purchased category X or category Y. They'll use some signals of intent data, which customers have been browsing or carting categories X or Y. But at the end of the day, the goal is the same, which is hone in on significantly more targeted populations of customers that look like they are likely to gravitate towards the particular categories that you're marking down. For example, if we need to mark down those fancy tank tops because they're not moving as quickly as we'd like, rather than sending that price eroding email to everybody in the customer base, let's send a more targeted communication through email, a customized landing page experience, perhaps for those customers for whom it is particularly relevant. This enables us to become much more surgical in moving through slow moving product categories, clearing out inventory that's not performing, without habituating the rest of our customer base to expect 20, 30% price drop on our everyday prices across all categories. This was a huge boon for this retailer once they adopted this approach, even just focusing on their two most important strategic categories to support every month. They were able to achieve exactly the same sell-through results that they had previously while targeting a very, very small fraction of the customer base. Like 15 to 20% of the total circulation, 100% of the results. And this enabled them to maintain much tighter control over their overall price messaging. Now, this I would characterize as like a low-hanging fruit, a short-term solution, right? Because Whether or not you're producing insights on customers' product affinities in-house or working with a retailer like Costora to leverage machine learning and see what individual customers are likely to respond to in the future, it is very likely within every retailer's capability to create some targeted audiences. And using cross-channel tools, especially the rise of audience tools like Facebook custom audiences, Google Customer Match, LiveRamp for display, to send extremely targeted markdown promotions and messages to just the relevant customers. A really interesting long-term solution, and I would characterize this more as inspiration, is imagine a world where we were able to very significantly reduce buying errors to increase the accuracy of our merchandise forecasting and really optimize our supply chain around the preferences of our customers. That would lead to much less inventory overruns in the first place, much less of a need to mark items down in order to keep things moving. A great retailer that has organized many aspects of their product organization around customer insights is Zara. Full disclosure, Costora does not work with Zara. We simply admire them, look up to them as a role model in some ways for how they funnel customer insights into their product planning and delivery pipeline. Zara makes use of a sophisticated technology system to capture insights on customer demand through runway shows, through social media, through in-store metrics, and pipe those back through their product design process. They also have a legendarily rapid supply chain. So from the moment of having an insight on a key trending style, what our high-value customers in Madrid or in New York City are likely to gravitate towards, it's a matter of weeks as opposed to months to get that in store. While this is an amazing feat for any retailer and something that all retailers, I think, aspire to in one sense or another, Costora has actually been working with a couple of retailers that are really pushing the envelope on incorporating customer insights into their planning process. Things like, hey, when we look at our customer base, what are the key trends that we see around certain product categories based on the most important segments in our customer base? For example, we know that our high value customers are going to drive 90% of our revenue over the coming year. What are the styles that they're disproportionately favoring? Where do we see key trends for them? What are the categories, subcategories, even the SKUs that are driving conversions for that segment? Imagine using those sorts of insights as an input in the planning process, figuring out what we should buy, how we should merchandise the site. That's where we see the next frontier, is actually incorporating those customer insights into the product planning phase of the cycle in order to lead to more accurate buys and less need for markdown in the first place. So that kind of rounds us off on inventory management. The next driver of promotionality and discounting when we talk to our retail partners is around competitive pressures. This is the notion of achieving parity or keeping parity with other retailers in our competitive set. Hey, retailer A is discounting 40%, retailer B is discounting 45%. Won't we fall behind if we don't keep pace with them? One of the sharpest analytical teams that Costora has the pleasure of working with is Crocs. Huge success story over the past few years. Back when we started working with Crocs, their team had been given a mandate to reduce their reliance on discounts and promotions. Now, this is the kind of mandate that folks at the executive level love to hand down. And it's actually really tricky when you think about Crocs's business. So they obviously have a robust direct-to-consumer operation, but they also are a wholesaler. So they work with distribution partners. They don't always have control over the discounting that is done on their products through the final channel. Additionally, they are in a low-cost space. And so this notion of weaning off of discounts and promotions as their collaborators / competitors, their channel partners, and other folks in their space were really stepping up the competitive pressure. This was something that kept them up at night, and they turned to Costora for help with. Here was the solution that we implemented, and this is a playbook that I would recommend for any retailers who find themselves in this tough situation. Starting out their relationship with Costora, Crocs had the the idea, perhaps the assumption that because they're in a promotional category and their competitive set is promotional, that every customer in their customer base was equally reliant on discounts and promotions in order to drive demand. What Castora discovered when we began working with them to sift through their customer data, look at how different customers are engaging with their products, who's buying things at relatively greater discount and relatively lesser discount. And what actually shocked us when we unearthed this insight with them was that there is a whole segment of their customer base that is actually relatively promotionally insensitive, meaning these are customers who are motivated by newness, by novelty, who have a strong enough relationship with the brand day in and day out that they don't actually need discounts in order to convert. The way that Castora approached this was through the predictive lens. So who are the customers who look like others that have bought at full price? But it's an analysis that a well-equipped customer analytics team can help uncover as well. When we look at all of our customers who have transacted over the past year, who have browsed the site, let's say over the past couple of months, who are the ones that tend to exclusively gravitate towards deeply discounted categories or buy on see promotion, and who are the ones that are willing to engage with us in the new arrivals category and in categories where we do not see, or during periods when we don't see heavy promotional activity. It was truly an astonishing discovery that there was a small but extremely valuable segment of the Crocs customer base that is promotionally resilient or insensitive. And what they undertook when they discovered this was a targeted communication strategy. When they reached out to communicate with those customers who were relatively full price, rather than leading with a discount or promotional value prop, they led with a value prop around the relationship with the brand. Here's what's new in Crocs land. We miss you. Here's why you should come back and engage with us. And what they saw was that they were able to drive tremendous gains in that segment without resorting to the discount tactics that they needed to move other more promotionally sensitive groups of customers. In fact, they actually saw amazing financial results as well. And so the short-term play here, the playbook, right, would be to try to categorize your customers, parse them out into different groups based on what motivates them to engage with your brand. Who are the discount seekers? Meaning they almost always engage in discount periods or in markdown categories. Who are the opportunists? Maybe the ones who will buy full price sometimes, or buy on markdown and promotions other times. And who are the ones who absolutely require those discounts to engage with your brand? For the folks who are discount sensitive, I'm not going to convince you that you shouldn't be discounting with them. That's the group where if we want to maintain competitive parity, looking at other retailers, we really need to double down and match what pure retailers, the competitive set, are doing. But to the extent that we can communicate more strategically with our full price customers, perhaps dial down the discount or even focus on totally non-promotional messaging for them, it's a way to almost quarantine the discount, be selectively price matching where the segments where that matters. So here's the long-term solution, and I don't think anybody's going to be super thrilled with this because it is one of the toughest things to do. I'm not trying to be glib when I say this. Develop a more unique value proposition. Well, that's not very encouraging, is it? I'm kind of kidding to some extent here. One of the interesting things that we've learned from working with our retailers is that how they define their competitive set matters tremendously. And the retailers that have been the most resilient, the best at not falling into that downward spiral of price matching and discounting, it's because they literally don't have a competitive set. They have zoomed in on an underserviced, underrepresented segment of customers, and they understand that segment so well, what makes them tick, what their day-to-day needs are, how they can improve the lives of that segment, that it doesn't really matter what other retailers are doing. Their customers view them as a unique value proposition. We have a number of retailers within the Castora brand portfolio that match this description, but one such one is LaFleur. We'll talk through a couple of additional retailers in just a moment and show how they are targeting underserved portions of the market, understanding their customers better than anybody in their competitive set, delivering a value proposition that is unique and tailored. MM. has done just this. Their bento box, for those who aren't familiar with MM. They're a women's fashion retailer. Their bento box offering, which provides a curated, personalized delivery of clothing, is such a smart way of resonating with the time-strapped, personalization craving demographic that they are serving, that as a matter of policy, they don't discount and they haven't had to. And so the very difficult to follow advice here, we'll look at how to do it a bit more tactically in just a minute, is find a segment of customers that needs your product desperately, that is being underserved by other portions of the market, and understand them better than anybody else, and infuse what they want and what they care about into the product that you sell, the way that you communicate with them, and how you keep them coming back in the long run. Okay, so the last bucket of discounting here is kind of the catch-all, right? It's like, I want to grow. I want to turbocharge my growth. I need to hit my comps from last year. The the previous two playbooks or solutions have been more focused on, hey, how do we not shrink while we wean off of promotions? How do we achieve the same great level of sell-through without blasting everybody with markdowns? How do we not lose share of wallet while becoming more targeted with whom we talk to about discounts? This is actually a growth imperative. How do we rev up the engines and achieve year-over-year growth? And so the types of recommendations that we're going to provide here are a little bit different. In the short term, of course, as we saw from that wonderful graphic from Smile, a big reason that retailers do promote is to drive revenue. It works in the short term. The challenge is with habituation. And so our short-term playbook here, which we've gleaned from working with some really smart retailers, is if you absolutely must promote in the short term, in order to juice those numbers and drive revenue, do it in the least habit forming way possible. Do it in a way that is actually conducive to meaningful long-term customer engagement with your brand and doesn't train customers to expect that this is something you're going to be running day in and day out. The retailers that we work with who are looking to wean off of promotions have generated some remarkably creative ideas for how to accomplish this goal. We've just provided a couple of examples here, but things like tiered offers, where you have to spend a certain amount, kind of spend thresholds. You have to spend a certain amount in order to unlock a certain percentage off. These are certainly promotions, but they have the virtuous benefit of driving up average order value. So they get customers to explore new categories potentially that they might not have come to on their own. It increases overall basket size. Similarly, bounce back offers, this is industry term for giving an offer to somebody who makes perhaps their first purchase if they come back and make a second purchase within a certain time frame. This is one tactic that we've seen retailers adopt to address that phenomenon that we talked about earlier. Like, hey, if we can get customers to come back and make a second purchase, they're X% more likely. Really smart bounce back offers are a good way to drive urgency without buying orders. So things like category targeted bounce back offers. Hey, it looks like you made a purchase in category X. Customers who shop category X also buy category Y. Come back and make a purchase in category Y in the next 30 days and get a certain percentage off your offer. Targeted bounce back offers rather than one size fits all. So focusing on those customers who look like they might have an affinity to engage with your brand again, rather than just blasting them out across all of your customers, many of whom are one and done and don't have a real affinity for your brand. And lastly, getting outside the mentality that all rewards for customers have to be financial. We've been working with some brands that are piloting absolutely breakthrough experiential rewards, expedited fulfillment and shipping, early access to new arrivals, one-on-one consultation with a personal style assistant. The sky's the limit, but those are the sorts of experiences that A, represent a more meaningful brand touchpoint than just $1 off, and B, can help get customers outside of this mindset of seeking out discounts as the only way of engaging with your brand. And so we've just highlighted a couple of formats that we've seen being really successful here for retailers, again, in the short run, trying to grow revenue. Things like innovative experiential events, mystery deals, right? So that customers don't come to expect a certain percentage off day in and day out. Incentivizing brand growing behaviors like referrals, or writing product reviews, engaging on social. These are all tactics from the arsenal of retailers that we've seen who have managed to get away from the straitjacket of price promotion alone. Now, the long-term solution here is well, I wish there were a single silver bullet. The reality is that it's a combination of activities. But when we look at the retailers who have managed to achieve year in and year out growth in their business, it's not because they do any one thing better than anyone else. It's not that they have the cleverest tiered discount format or the best abandoned cart emails. It's because at a really fundamental level, they're looking to infuse deep customer insights into their entire way of doing business. Everything from which customers they're acquiring, how they're spending their marketing dollars, to how they're keeping those customers coming back, and how they're even thinking about product development and creating a brand that folks will love. A couple of case studies here to motivate what we see from the real best of the best. I mentioned Crocs earlier as a real leader in the customer-centric growth movement. One of the ways that they've done it, in addition to being smart about discounting, is by focusing relentlessly, obsessively on who their best customers are and how they can acquire more customers like those. What if we were able to take that full price segment as a thought experiment and grow it by 10%, by 15%, by 20%? Well, that would mean a major win for the business. The way that Crocs is doing that is by actually using high value customers or customers who show high value behaviors for the brand, and focusing all of their acquisition arsenal and resources on acquiring similar customers. For any brands that might be out there listening on the phone, this might mean, hey, if we know that millennials are our most valuable customers, or we want to attract more full price shoppers, or heck, we just want to look at our customers who have the greatest propensity to stick with our brand and drive value over the coming year, taking those incredibly valuable audiences and using that to steer the acquisition ship. For Crocs, they did this through lookalike targeting on Facebook and display. They saw great results. While these results are wonderful, we tend to see an incredibly strong growth for retailers that use CRM audiences, specifically predictive audiences, across a variety of marketing channels. And so the play here is bring in more customers who are likely to engage with your brand in that full price mode and really care about your value proposition, fewer discount seekers and opportunists. So once we get those customers in the door, how do we actually keep them coming back without resorting to discounts? The quick case study or play that I want to highlight here is from the Wolverine family of brands, footwear conglomerate that has actually undertaken a huge revolution around customer centricity over the past year. They recently launched their first ever unified customer database, and that's empowered them to better understand what makes their customers tick and how to engage with them, to the point where they've actually grown their e-commerce business by 20% year over year. Oh, sorry. The key to their growth is reaching out to the right customers at the right time with the right message. Again, that's easier said than done, but understanding who are high value customers, what do they need in order to come back? Once a customer comes in buying product X, how do we make them aware of and make them care about product Y, and when's the right time to do so? Those are the types of insights that they're infusing through all of their retention campaigns now. And this 20% year over year growth, I think, is the result of a really concerted effort to communicate with their customers with an eye to retention over the long term. Now, acquisition, customer cultivation, and retention, those are great marketing specific strategies. But the reality is that it takes more than just the marketing team to build a brand that is a long-term growth engine without relying on discounting. Specifically, it requires that marketing lead the charge, but infuse customer insights into all kinds of strategic decisions that the business makes. One absolutely transformational case study that we like to talk about here is from Bonobos, one of Castora's retail partners. A couple of years ago, Bonobos had this really wacky hypothesis that they should consider opening physical retail locations. And I think if we could get back in our time machine and look at the types of questions they were getting from investors, from their competitive set a few years ago, it would have been just bewilderment, right? Bonobos, one of their main sources of competitive advantage as an e-commerce retailer is that they're light, low overhead. They don't have to deal with a lot of the headache, the expensive retail footprint. And so the idea of an e-commerce superstar expanding into the dying legacy retail channel was pretty preposterous at the time. But they had this idea that if they could get their high value customers to engage with them in a more meaningful hands-on way, to have a real interaction where perhaps they're getting fitted for products or talking to a knowledgeable expert, that would unlock a tremendous amount of brand loyalty. And so they started out just a pilot program, one or two guide shops in the most expensive real estate market in the US, in New York. And what they saw was absolutely astonishing. Within a very, very short period of time, they were able to ascertain that customers who engaged with their guide shop, especially those who engaged with the guide shop prior to making their first purchase, turned out to be exponentially more valuable to the brand, have a longer tenure, longer relationship with the brand, spend more, buy more at full price than customers who had only had digital touch points in the e-commerce world. And this empowered them to actually take on a massive expansion strategy for this concept, the guide shop concept, to the point where today there are literally dozens of guide shops in markets throughout the country. And this is a big source of growth for them. Now, I highlight this because marketing to some extent led the charge, pressuring their cross-functional partners. Hey, what if we were to experiment with this concept? Marketing is typically well situated to measure things like lifetime value and impact on customer behavior. But it was really a coordinated cross-functional effort with store planning teams, merchandising teams, the finance team to figure out how this rollout concept would affect their overall business. And they did it. And it's been a major engine of growth for them. So these are the types of customer insights that we see retailers utilizing that are actually able to grow their business in the long run without relying on discounts. They're unearthing what makes customers love them and what makes their customers high value, and mobilizing all of their teams around those sorts of tactics. And so just to quickly recap, rampant promotions are hurting retailers. Yikes, that's strongly worded. We prefer to approach this from a really empathetic place. We know it is tough out there. One of the bittersweet things about working in retail is that we get to see the sorrow and the joy. The sorrow of having to make a very aggressive plan this year with every promotion driving less value than it did last year, so having to cut deeper and deeper. The joy when retailers are able to enact some of these tactics and playbooks to actually wean off of promotions and achieve good, organic, healthy growth the right way. Customer insights, and this is obviously a big tenet of Castora's philosophy. Customer insights can help mitigate and prevent the problem. So in the short term, we've looked at how predictive customer insights on things like category affinity, discount sensitivity, who are our high value customers, those can help us almost quarantine and reduce our use of discounts, become more surgical while maintaining the same performance. Understanding what gets our customers to come back and thinking about the high value behaviors we want to encourage can help us architect better promotions to actually drive growth, ones that don't habituate our customers to expect price promotions in the future. And ultimately, all of the long-term visions that we've presented here, these are like the superstars of customer centricity. These are organizations that care obsessively about customer metrics, What's our repeat rate? What's our customer lifetime value? How rapidly are we getting customers from purchase one to purchase two? And they've mobilized a variety of teams, their merchandise and product planning teams, their finance teams to solve that problem together. And then, lest any of the solutions that we present here seem daunting or out of reach, just a friendly reminder that we are the world's biggest proponents of the crawl, walk, run approach. So start with the simple plays that we've highlighted here, making use of even targeted category affinities rather than a one-size-fits-all markdown message. Anything that we can do to drive even modest benefit for the business as a way of building a case for broader cross-functional buy-in and application of customer insights. And so with that, I'm going to wrap up the yakking portion on my part of the webinar. I just want to do a short call out. One of my favorite times, my absolute favorite time of year, hands down, is Custora's annual conference, Customer Analytics for Retail Marketer, or CARMA. It is in New York City. This year is on October 4th, 2018. I would invite any folks who have not yet claimed their space in the conference to go ahead and register. We'll send along information with our wrap up and recap on how you can do that. But it's a wonderful day full of best practices, really thoughtful insights, including some of the folks that we've highlighted here as great success stories will be there telling their stories better than I possibly can. And so I would love the chance to meet and engage with some of the folks on today's webinar in person.
Thank you so much, Jordan. I am just going to share a couple questions that came in during the course of the webinar. I think we have time for about two. The first question for you, Jordan, is how do your models determine who's likely to purchase certain products?
That is a very good question. So I guess I'll start by glossing briefly some of the approaches that we see retailers using in the absence of like a fancy pants predictive model. Because as I mentioned, we're huge proponents of this crawl, walk, run approach. So if there are things that your team is able to do in-house today, that's a great start. Many retailers that we work with, the biggest obstacle for them to understanding customer behavior is that their customer data itself is actually fragmented across a number of systems and applications. For example, if they're a multi-channel retailer, perhaps their e-commerce data lives, in a Demandware or Magento, and their point of sale data lives somewhere else. Similarly, they might be collecting web intent behavior, so who's visiting or browsing the site, but that might live in some third data silo. And so it's really, really difficult to understand customer behavior when you don't have a unified view of the customer. The biggest obstacle that Costora helps retailers achieve, at least as kind of a first order challenge, is getting all that data in one place and organizing it into customer profiles so that we can see that, let's say Maddie made 3 purchases last year and they were in categories A, B, and C. The approach that we see retailers often adopting is just focusing on historical behavior. So like what was the category that somebody bought most over the past year, or which customers have browsed products like cashmere socks over the past couple of weeks. Those help give us an indication of who has shown interest or demand for a category in the past. There are a couple of challenges that predictive models can help us overcome with those sorts of approaches. For one, what somebody has bought in the past isn't necessarily indicative of what they're likely to buy in the future. In some cases, it's indicative of what they're not likely to buy in the future. If we think about big ticket durables, let's say I go out and buy a Montclair ski parka, right? That's $1,000 worth of ski parka. I might love Montclair, but I'm not very likely to buy another ski parka 3 months from now. We see this often with furniture retailers that we work with, home decor, right? What you've bought in the past isn't necessarily representative of what you're likely to buy in the future. The other challenge that we see is there's something somewhat limiting, right? Let's say that a customer has only bought pants in the past. Well, what else might they be interested in? Certainly, we have other data points from other customers in our customer base. We know what similar customers have bought and what that path looks like. Why don't we try to leverage some of that data to inform how, our pants only customer, what we think she's likely to do. And so it's with that mindset, solving some of those challenges, that Castora has built up a set of machine learning models to forecast how individuals are likely to engage with different products in the future. The way that they work at a high level, we sometimes describe it as pattern matching or look-alike modeling within the customer base. It's pretty similar to approaches adopted by providers like Amazon or Netflix, trying to figure out, what title you're likely to respond to next. We basically look at everything that we know about you as a customer. So Maddie, what has she bought in the past? What do we know about Maddie as a customer? Where's she from? What channels does she tend to purchase through? And then we identify similar looking customers within the customer base. So perhaps we see that 9 times out of 10, when customers have a purchase path similar to Maddie's, they go on to buy, I don't know, a hoodie after those cashmere socks. That would inform our prediction of what Maddie is likely to buy next. And so at a high level, it's this kind of look-like modeling and pattern matching, but it's not just fancy data science for the sake of data science. It's really trying to help retailers understand, how do we leverage all of the customer data that we have and look at these almost customer journeys over time to forecast what's the next best thing to suggest to someone.
Thank you, Jordan. So we have one more question. In Castora, what is the difference between a discount opportunist and a discount seeker?
That's a very good Castora specific question. I wonder if that's one of our customers on the phone. If so, hat tip to you. I love that question. What we see when we look at data from retailers, and I should mention, that specific dynamics vary from retailer to retailer based on your promotional patterns and history, is that customers tend to cluster together into a couple of buckets based on how they engage with your brand around price promotions. For example, with most brands, we see that there is, or most brands that promote at least some of the time, we see that there is a cluster of customers who literally, hell or high water cannot motivate them to engage with the brand unless there is a steep discount. Those folks, we would say, are explicitly discount seekers, right? That's the thing that they are looking for to get them to engage with your brand. Similarly, we see very often, including with folks like Crocs that we highlighted earlier in the call, that there are customers who seem utterly indifferent to price promotions. It doesn't matter, whether you're launching a sale tomorrow, they will buy today, and it's because the things that they care about are almost unrelated to price, right? They care about newness. They care about the particular products that you carry. And those folks tend to almost always engage with you at full price or close to it. When we look at a wide variety of retailers, we do see very often that the most interesting segment for testing into and exploring different promotional strategies with is kind of that like limbo segment, folks who can go either way, folks who engage with you occasionally at full price and occasionally seek out discounts. That's within Castora's clustering language. We call those folks discount opportunists, meaning if you put a discount in front of them, they will likely jump at it, but they might not necessarily need a discount in order to convert. And so that group is really interesting for testing into how much can we resist discounting with that group before we start seeing a drop off in demand. And so, yeah, I hope that's a helpful explanation. Discount opportunities are basically folks who always see mixed behavior around response to promotion. Okay. Maddie, thanks
Sorry,
for the.
my microphone just cut out for a second, but thank you so much, Jordan, and thank you everyone who joined today. We'll be following up in the next couple of hours with the recording as well as a short survey. So thanks. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much.